What is Genesis all about? Over the next few weeks, I'd like to do a preaching series giving short summaries of each of the first 5 books of the Bible. If it goes well, we could extend it further, but today we start with the book of Genesis. It should be remembered that the book of Genesis is not a scientific textbook, neither is it a history or an archaeological textbook. It's really a book, I believe, of archetypal stories, inviting us to explore the mystery of our human experience and our human destiny and purpose. The validity of the book does not therefore stand or fall on the accuracy of the information it gives, but rather it stands or falls on the assertions it makes about the meaning and the purpose of human life and existence. The book can be divided into 2 sections. The first section runs from Genesis 1 to about Genesis 11 verse 25, and the second section of the book runs from chapter 11 verse 26 to the end of the book, the end of chapter 50. In the first section, we read of 2 accounts of the origin of the universe and the world. The first gives a kind of a bird's eye view, and the second focuses on the so-called first human beings, Adam and Eve. The rest of the section runs from Adam and Eve through Cain and Abel and their descendants down to the story of Noah and the flood, and ends with the story of the Tower of Babel. From the initial harmony of the Garden of Eden, the story tells of the rapid descent into disharmony, waywardness, and self-destruction. In the middle of this first section, there is an initial attempted reboot, where the God character in the story sends a flood to wipe the slate clean and to begin again, exterminating the bad and starting again with Noah, who's described as a righteous man, and his family. But the plan fails, and humanity very quickly descends again into disharmony, waywardness, and waywardness, again driven mostly, it would seem, often by human pride, which culminates in the building of the Tower of Babel, in which humanity are pictured trying to build a tower up to heaven, bridging the gap between heaven and earth through their own misguided ingenuity and technological advances. Apparently, they've become a danger not just to themselves and to the earth, but also a potential danger to heaven as well. And so God scatters them across the earth, giving them different languages to prevent them, to prevent not just the corruption of the earth, but also the further corruption of heaven too, it would seem. The second major section in the book is from chapter 11, verse 26 to the end of chapter 50. And it represents a change in strategy by God. The quick fix method of exterminating evil failed. And so the God character in the book adopts a long-term strategy. And this involves God calling and befriending Abraham and Sarah and their descendants, and taking them into the school of God's love and wisdom, so that they might slowly learn God's ways and the ways of faith and trust, in order to be a blessing to the rest of the world. The second half of the story follows the descendants of Abraham and Sarah, most especially Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's 12 sons, who become the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. The book ends with the story of Joseph, who is betrayed by his brothers, who are jealous of the favoritism he receives from their father Jacob. Joseph ends up a slave in Egypt, but he rises up the ranks to become Pharaoh's regent, which enables him to provide sanctuary to the very brothers who betrayed him. That's a brief outline of the book. What are some of the major themes and lessons in the book? The first major assertion of the book of Genesis is that there is a higher power or a higher wisdom at work behind the scenes of life, constantly bringing order out of chaos, light out of darkness, and life out of nothingness, as the book describes God doing at the very beginning of creation. In the language of the book itself, this mysterious higher power and greater wisdom is called Elohim, the Supreme, or the Most High, also called Jehovah or Jehovah, which later on in the book of Exodus we find out means the I Am. And often these names in the book are used together. A second major underlying assertion in the book is that human beings have two contrasting dimensions. The greatness of our potential, on the one hand, to reflect God's life, God's divine life, is mirrored by the greatness of our potential for evil and for destruction and self-destruction. It would seem that without the potential to make bad and destructive choices, humanity wouldn't truly be able to realize our potential for goodness and true greatness. Our potential for greatness, it seems, lies in our ability to gain mastery over our tendency towards evil and self-destruction. As we read in the story of Cain and Abel, God says to Cain, "Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must gain mastery over it." But this is not simply by humanity's own doing. As we shall see as the story unfolds, it will happen by God's grace, God's calling, God's leading, and God's guidance. Left to our own devices, it would seem that we tend to make wayward and destructive choices, but in relationship with Elohim, human beings can begin to tap into their true inner potential for greatness and nobility made in the image of Elohim. And so throughout the book of Genesis, we see God working with ordinary, wayward human beings, seeking to teach them his ways of grace and truth. Jacob's name means deceiver, and he becomes the father of the nation of Israel, which means the wrestler with God. In other words, this journey of growth in God's school of love and wisdom is not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be a neat line moving in one direction, but rather it is a journey that's going to be characterized sometimes by 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. A third major underlying assertion in the book is that you cannot divide the world of human beings too neatly into those who are described as good and those who are described as bad or evil. And this seems to be the lesson of the Noah story. The line between good and evil does not run between people, but it runs through every human heart. We all have the seeds and the potential for evil, waywardness, and self-destruction within us. Even Noah, the so-called righteous man, has this potential for waywardness and destruction within him, which is why the attempted reboot with the flood ends in failure. A fourth major theme in the book is that God's ways are not our ways. In the story, the God character constantly disrupts the natural human assumptions. The normal cultural human assumption in the book, for example, is that the firstborn should be the chosen one. But throughout the story, Elohim, Jehovah, chooses someone other than the firstborn to fulfill the divine purposes. This is a value that I believe has come to be deeply rooted in Western culture, that the circumstances of one's birth, the order of one's birth, one could say, doesn't need to and perhaps shouldn't have to determine one's future possibilities and potential. Something that is rooted there in the book of Genesis. A fifth major theme in Genesis is that God is able to take the waywardness of human beings, to take our mistakes and to turn them around and to use them for God's good purposes, like using a crooked stick to beat a straight path. According to the book of Genesis, there are no human mistakes or waywardness that can ultimately thwart God's greater purposes. It can all be used as material in God's greater good and design. And so the book of Genesis, which gets its name from the Hebrew word Bereshith, meaning beginning, is a book about beginnings and new beginnings, and asserts that God is the God of new beginnings. For God is constantly bringing light out of darkness, order out of chaos, life out of emptiness and barrenness, and new purpose out of our waywardness and our mistakes. A final major assertion that the book of Genesis makes is that the purpose and meaning of human existence is that we are created to be a blessing to others, blessed to be a blessing. One could say to be creatures that bring value to others. We see it in the call of Abraham and Sarah, where Elohim Yehovah says, "In you all the families of the earth will be blessed." We see it also in the story of Joseph at the end of the book, as he finds himself blessed as he rises up the ranks in Egypt through God's grace and through the integrity of his life. He is blessed to be a blessing to others. In fact, more specifically to the very brothers who betrayed him and sold him as a slave in the first place. According to Genesis, blessings are not for our own private pleasure, but always given to be shared with others for the greater good of God's purposes. Today, as we stand at the beginning of a new year, the book of Genesis invites us to remember that God, the great wisdom, the higher power that brought us into being, is the God of beginnings and new beginnings. What new beginning might this year ahead have in store for you, for me, for us? What mistakes, waywardness, misfortunes, perhaps even tragedies of the past might become the seeds of new blessing in the future, out of the seeming chaos of the present? What is the new light that God is already speaking into the darkness? Amen. May God bless you as you continue to ponder and think about and wrestle upon these things. Amen.